The Russia-Ukraine war, which began in February 2022, has evolved into one of the most significant and complex conflicts in modern European history. Today, the situation remains fluid, with ongoing military clashes, shifting territorial control, and a wide range of political, economic, and humanitarian consequences that continue to shape the war's trajectory. To understand what's happening today in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it's important to break down the key events on the battlefield, the state of both countries' military strategies, and the international responses shaping the course of the conflict. Military situation on the ground. The war is in its second year, and both Russia and Ukraine have settled into a protracted conflict that spans hundreds of miles along the eastern and southern fronts. After Ukraine's successful counteroffensives in 2022, where it regained significant territory in the Kharkiv region and the Kherson region, the front line has largely stabilized. However, fierce battles continue, particularly around the key regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhzhia, which remain hotspots of military activity. Eastern Front, Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Today, the eastern part of Ukraine remains one of the most heavily contested areas. Russia's strategy in this region has focused on securing control of Donetsk and Luhansk, areas that were partly occupied by pro-Russian separatists even before the full-scale invasion. Over the past several months, Russian forces have concentrated their efforts on pushing Ukrainian forces out of key cities like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka, towns that have seen some of the heaviest fighting. Despite significant losses, Russian forces continue to launch offensives in these areas, seeking to consolidate their control over the entire Donbas region. The battle for Bakhmut, for example, has been described as a meat grinder, where both sides have suffered high casualties. Ukrainian forces have made efforts to defend the area, despite Russia's incremental gains. Although some of these towns have been partially surrounded by Russian forces, Ukrainian troops continue to resist, preventing Russia from claiming full control. In Luhansk, Russian forces have focused on fortifying their positions after retaking much of the territory earlier in the war. However, Ukrainian forces have been probing Russian defenses, attempting to retake ground and disrupt Russian supply lines. Southern Front, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. To the south, the Zaporizhzhia region remains another critical battlefield. This area is home to Europe's largest nuclear power plant, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which has been under Russian control since early in the war. The plant has been the subject of intense concern from the international community, given the risks of a nuclear disaster. Today, Ukrainian forces are conducting operations to disrupt Russian supply lines and pressure Russian troops stationed in this region. The aim of these operations is to weaken Russia's grip on the southern regions and ultimately retake control of the strategic city of Melitopol, which would sever Russia's land bridge to Crimea. However, Russian defenses in Zaporizhzhia have been heavily fortified, and progress has been slow for Ukrainian forces. In the Kherson region, despite Ukraine's successful liberation of the city of Kherson in late 2022, Russia continues to launch artillery and drone strikes across the Dnipro River, targeting civilian infrastructure and Ukrainian military positions. This area remains a dangerous flashpoint, as Ukraine seeks to push Russian forces further east, while Russia attempts to maintain pressure on Ukraine's southern defenses. The use of drones and artillery, one of the defining features of the conflict today, is the widespread use of drones and artillery by both sides. The war has seen a massive expansion in drone technology, with both Russia and Ukraine utilizing drones for reconnaissance, targeting artillery strikes, and even as direct attack platforms. Ukraine, in particular, has benefited from Western-supplied drones, as well as locally produced systems that have helped them improve their battlefield intelligence. On the other hand, Russia has increasingly relied on Iranian-made drones, such as the Shahed 136, which it has used to strike Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, particularly energy facilities. These drone attacks have caused significant damage to Ukraine's power grid, especially during the winter months, leading to widespread blackouts and further deepening the humanitarian crisis in the country. Artillery also remains a dominant force in the conflict. Russia has employed a strategy of mass artillery bombardments to grind down Ukrainian defenses, a tactic that has led to high civilian casualties and the destruction of urban areas. Ukraine, for its part, has utilized long-range artillery systems supplied by NATO, such as the American HIMARS, high-mobility artillery rocket system to hit Russian supply depots, command centers, and troop concentrations far behind the front lines. The effectiveness of artillery, combined with the extensive use of drones, has made this war one of attrition, where both sides are trying to outlast the other by wearing down their forces and resources. Ukrainian counteroffensive and strategic objectives. In response to Russia's aggression, Ukraine has been conducting a counteroffensive, particularly in the southern and eastern regions, to reclaim occupied territory. Ukraine's military strategy is focused on liberating key areas that are strategically important for both military and economic reasons. One of Ukraine's main objectives is to sever the so-called land bridge between mainland Russia and the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia has held since its annexation of Crimea in 2014. This land corridor runs through the southern regions of Ukraine, including Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, and allows Russia to move troops and supplies to Crimea. Ukraine's efforts to disrupt this supply line are seen as crucial to weakening Russia's hold on Crimea and forcing them to reconsider their broader war aims. Additionally, Ukraine has continued to target Russian logistics hubs, ammunition depots, and transport routes, seeking to disrupt Russian resupply efforts and erode their ability to sustain the war. Ukraine's counteroffensive has been met with stiff Russian resistance, particularly in heavily fortified areas, but Ukrainian forces have made incremental gains in key sectors. Despite these efforts, progress has been slower than many in Ukraine had hoped, due in part to the strength of Russian defensive positions and the sheer scale of the front lines. Ukrainian forces have had to contend with entrenched Russian positions, vast minefields, and complex networks of fortifications that make advances difficult and costly. Russian military strategy and challenges. Russia, on the other hand, continues to face significant challenges in its war effort. After suffering heavy losses in manpower and equipment in the early stages of the invasion, Russia has been forced to adapt its military strategy. In the first year of the war, Russia's plans to quickly capture Kiev and other major cities were thwarted by strong Ukrainian resistance, leading Moscow to shift its focus to the Donbas region and the south. Russia's current strategy appears to be one of attrition, aiming to wear down Ukrainian forces through relentless bombardments and slow, grinding offensives. However, this approach has also taken a toll on Russian forces. The Russian military has suffered from poor morale, logistical challenges, and the loss of experienced soldiers. Reports of Russian troops being poorly equipped and undertrained continue to surface, and the country has had to rely heavily on conscripts and Wagner Group mercenaries to fill gaps in its ranks. Additionally, sanctions imposed by Western countries have had a significant impact on Russia's ability to resupply its military with advanced technology and weapons systems. This has led to delays in production and forced Russia to rely more on older equipment and foreign-supplied drones, particularly from Iran. The leadership in Moscow, particularly President Vladimir Putin, continues to present the war as a necessary defense against NATO expansion and Western aggression. Russian state-controlled media consistently portrays the conflict as a fight to protect Russian-speaking populations in Ukraine, and any setbacks are framed as temporary or part of a broader strategic plan. Despite these narratives, internal divisions within Russia's military leadership have emerged, with reports of disagreements between the regular army and mercenary groups like Wagner over how the war should be conducted. These tensions have further complicated Russia's ability to coordinate its operations effectively. Humanitarian impact and civilian casualties. The human toll of the Russia-Ukraine war continues to be staggering. Millions of people have been displaced from their homes, with over 10 million Ukrainians fleeing to other countries, particularly in Europe. Many more remain internally displaced within Ukraine, often living in dire conditions as Russian missile and artillery strikes target civilian infrastructure. Today, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is exacerbated by the destruction of essential services like electricity, water, and healthcare. Russian missile and drone attacks on Ukraine's energy grid have led to widespread blackouts, particularly during the harsh winter months. Hospitals and emergency services have struggled to cope with the influx of wounded civilians and soldiers, and many towns and cities in the east and south of Ukraine are experiencing severe shortages of food, medicine, and clean water. In areas that Russia has occupied, there have been widespread reports of human rights abuses, including forced deportations, summary executions, and the detention of Ukrainian citizens in so-called filtration camps. These reports have been documented by human rights organizations and have prompted international calls for investigations into potential war crimes. The war has also severely impacted Ukraine's economy, with large portions of the country's agricultural and industrial capacity being either destroyed or under Russian occupation. This has led to food shortages not only in Ukraine, but also in countries that rely on Ukrainian grain exports. The global impact of these shortages has been particularly felt in regions like Africa and the Middle East, where Ukraine had been a key supplier of grain. International response and diplomacy. The international response to the Russia-Ukraine war continues to evolve. Western countries, particularly those in NATO and the European Union, have remained staunch supporters of Ukraine, providing the country with military, financial, and humanitarian aid. The United States has been a key backer of Ukraine, supplying advanced weapons systems like HIMARS, Patriot missile defense systems, and tanks, which have bolstered Ukraine's ability to defend itself and conduct counteroffensives. European nations, particularly Poland, the Baltic states, and the United Kingdom, have also played critical roles in supporting Ukraine, both through direct military assistance and by providing refuge for Ukrainian refugees. The European Union has imposed a series of economic sanctions on Russia, targeting key sectors like oil, gas, and finance. These sanctions have had a profound impact on the Russian economy, cutting it off from Western markets and limiting its ability to access critical technologies. At the diplomatic level, the war has led to a significant realignment of global alliances. Russia has sought to strengthen its ties with non-Western countries, particularly China and Iran, while also trying to maintain relationships with countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. However, Moscow's international standing has been severely damaged, with much of the world viewing its invasion of Ukraine as a violation of international law and sovereignty. China's role in the conflict remains ambiguous. While Beijing has refrained from openly supporting Russia's military actions, it has also avoided condemning the invasion. China's stance appears to be motivated by a desire to maintain a neutral position that allows it to benefit from its economic relationships with both Russia and the West. China's potential role as a mediator in the conflict has been suggested by some analysts, but so far, no concrete steps toward a peace process have been made. Conclusion. The Russia-Ukraine war remains a highly fluid and dangerous conflict with no clear end in sight. As of today, both sides are locked in a war of attrition, with the front lines largely stabilized but subject to constant attacks and counterattacks. Ukraine continues to resist Russian advances and push for the liberation of its occupied territories, while Russia persists in its efforts to consolidate control over the Donbas and southern Ukraine. The war has had a devastating impact on civilians, with millions displaced and thousands killed. International efforts to broker peace have so far failed, and the conflict shows no signs of ending in the immediate future. As the war grinds on, the potential for further escalation remains, with both sides digging in for what could be a long and protracted conflict. The international community remains deeply invested in the outcome, as the implications of the war extend far beyond the borders of Ukraine and Russia, affecting global security, the economy, and the future of international law. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.